Good afternoon, and welcome to our restart of our program. It's been a packed couple of days, online and in person, and we're thrilled and honored to have Senator Tim Scott with us. To introduce the senator in this session, I'd like to welcome to the stage Maria Ziba, Vice President of Government Affairs for the National Pork Producers Council, one of our conference sponsors, and a WITC board member. Maria?
Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here and very excited that everybody was able to come out right before the snow and we're able to all meet together to discuss a very important topic of trade. The National Pork Producers Council, once again, is sponsoring this wonderful event that brings the community together on matters of great urgency, which is international affairs and international trade. I'm very happy to serve on the board of directors for WITC, but I also want to thank Ken and his leadership, and Diego, his leadership, not only with WITC, but with the WITC Academy, which today is very important in training and emerging leaders in the international trade space. With that, I do want to take the time to welcome everybody. Hope you enjoy the lunch. And I do want to introduce the senator from the great state of South Carolina, Senator Tim Scott, who has been a champion of trade for many years. He is the current chair of the Senate Banking Committee, but most importantly for those here, he also serves on the Senate Finance Committee and has been a great champion of international trade. And with that, I'll turn it over. And we appreciate you making the time for us, especially on a soon-to-be snowy day in Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, thank you, Senator Scott, for being with here. Hi, how are you?
Doing well?
I'm good. How are you?
You know, this is good. I must concede, when I hear snow as a South Carolinian, we stay in our houses.
Well, we do in D.C. too.
Oh, is that right? Okay,
yes, for sure.
There's a flurry. Our school's closed for a week, and that is a good sign that we are scared of things that fall from the sky that are white.
That's right. There's a million school administrators all over the D.C. area freaking out right now.
Yes.
As I'm sure some of the people in the audience are. So, well, thank you so much for being with us on a snow day. I saw that you had an exciting weekend. You and your colleagues were at the Super Bowl.
Yes.
I know you're a diehard Cowboys fan. How did you decide?
Let us pray. My God, why have you forsaken me? Okay, please continue. Yes.
Well, I was just wondering, who did you root for this weekend and why?
I will concede that as a Cowboys fan, I apologize. I like to stand. My mother wanted a preacher. She got a politician, so I'm still trying to help her recover from that. I grew up on an Air Force base when I was a little kid, 7 years old, and I played for this team called the Cowboys. They put a star on my helmet, and I fell in love with the Cowboys. And so since then, I've been a passionate fan for 52 years. We haven't won a playoff game that matters in 30 years. So most of you, I'm looking around the room, y'all don't even know what the Cowboys are. It's a football team in Dallas, Texas. I rooted for the Eagles mostly because I did not want the Chiefs to have 3 in a row.
Woohoo!
Someone has to do it. It will be the Cowboys in the year 2173.
Well, I already told you I'm a Broncos fan.
Yes.
I feel the same way.
Well,
so we can pray for them too.
Yes, ma'am.
So turning to some serious topics, I know that
was a serious topic for me.
Okay, I know. Okay.
Please continue.
I should say more serious topics. You're the chairman of the Banking Committee.
Yes, ma'am.
And I know that you recently released your priorities for 2025. Can you tell us something about what you're hoping to accomplish this year?
Yes, so several things. Perhaps the biggest thing is financial inclusion is a big issue for me. I grew up in poverty in a single-parent household, so our ability to make sure that we right-size the regulatory framework so that more people have access to the capital that they need to start businesses is really important from my perspective. For most Americans, the American dream really is tantamount to having a house. And so making sure that our access to a house is more affordable, more likely is important. So we're trying to focus on things like if you have good credit, but it's not on your credit score, you want to make sure that it's easier to see it on your credit score. So in other words, those who pay rent, who pay their cell phones on time, their electric bills on time, all that is not included in your credit score. So it's really hard for our 3 major credit scoring agencies to understand and appreciate what a good credit score is if you're not using all the information, which really does discriminate against those who are in many ways credit invisible. And so making those folks visible so that those who are credit worthy have access to home ownership or starting a small business are things that I really care about, very passionate about. From my perspective, if you thought about my mission is to make America's economy work for the working class. So a blue-collar comeback is what I'm focusing on as chairman of the banking committee. Another thing that's an important part of my portfolio, of course, is our national security apparatus that runs through our financial institutions is a part of our jurisdiction as well. And so from that perspective, I think everything from export controls is incredibly important, sanctions really important. You think about slowing down, if not stopping, the nuclear acceleration in Iran. It comes through our ability to use our sanctions regime in an effective way. And to the extent that we're able to do that, I think we will find ourselves in the best position to keep Americans safe and, frankly, to work towards that whole concept of world peace. If we do that well, I think we're heading in the right direction. Finally, on the national security front, it's hard to have a conversation about national security without thinking about border security. And perhaps for me, it comes down to a good friend of mine whose son died about 2 years ago because of fentanyl coming across our southern border. I don't really know many families in our country that have not been negatively impacted by fentanyl coming across our borders. 100,000 Americans have lost their lives to fentanyl. Each kid has 2 parents. Sometimes blended families, you can have 4. It's 300,000 to 400,000 Americans whose lives have been devastated by something that we can slow down, maybe even stop. And so I worked on legislation called Fend Off Fentanyl. We have 23 members at that time of the Senate Banking Committee, 23-0. Y'all think, do bipartisan things happen in America? Yes, on the Banking Committee. And we voted nonpartisan, Republicans and Democrats, to take care of our families back at home. And we wanted to freeze the assets of the 3 major Mexican cartels who have about $20 billion flowing through banking systems. And to the extent that we can keep our focus not on Republicans or Democrats, red and blue, but keep our focus on the American people, I think we find ourselves in the strongest position to make sure that we not only slow down the spread of fentanyl in our country, but that we also increase hope and opportunity throughout this nation, and I believe, frankly, throughout the world.
Thank you for that. I think one of the things you mentioned security, national security, economic security, and the intersection of that with trade is top of mind for a lot of people in the trade world.
Yes.
One of the things that's really important, bipartisan support, is AI leadership and ensuring that the U.S. is the leader on AI. And that means that we need to really stand up for companies and make sure that they can succeed around the world. As a member of the Senate Finance Committee, and then just generally, would love to know your thoughts on what should be the priorities for Congress and the administration to make that happen.
I think for me, if you think about the future of everything, it's going to be touched by 2 basic things: quantum computing and artificial intelligence. Understanding that, to me, means having the lightest touch necessary, not possible, but necessary to make sure that our focus is on making sure that our private sector is gung-ho moving forward in this technological revolution that will overwhelm the world, and I want the origins of that as often as possible to be here in America. And so to the extent that we right-size our regulatory framework and our legislative priorities to make that goal achievable is in our collective best interest. I think consistently the government, we do most things in a mediocre way. The private sector seems to have the position of supremacy on getting things done. And so to the extent that we empower the private sector, I think we're better off. The more we try to figure out how to stop it from happening here through rules or regs, I'm thinking about a couple AI diffusion rule and others, maybe well-intentioned, I don't know, but at the end of the day, it typically has unintended consequences that have not been fully vetted or baked into our philosophy. Therefore, it's hard for us to make really good objective decisions if ours is to blanket entire sectors of our economy and say, you know what, you can't do this, you can't do that. So my hope is that the light touch will go a long way into making sure that America's supremacy financially is also technologically, because in my opinion, they're wet and water that cannot be separated.
Yeah, and I think that not only in the US, I think that's an excellent point for US, but also around the world. I think a lot of countries feel that it's perfectly acceptable for them to put restrictions on US companies, and interested in your thoughts about that and what we should be doing to combat that.
I think if you think about the place where free market and capitalism is hard to survive, it's Europe in so many ways. If you want to see capital formation, you have to turn to the West, and when I say the West, I mean like America. Yes. So like the West Coast, Silicon Valley, East Coast, Boston, New York, of course, the new digital harbor called Charleston, South Carolina,
That's right.
where I call home. There are a lot of places that it's happening, but it's not happening in Europe. Why? Because the rules are so oppressive and so aggressive that it actually stymies creativity and innovation. You actually need a free market that allows for winners and losers to actually happen. And if you have a market where winners and losers, you don't want any losers, you won't have any winners. And that's what we're seeing around the globe. And so that puts pressure on their markets, but it also frees our market to continue to be the global leader. If we're going to continue that position, and I'll use the word supremacy about 15 times before I'm done, because I think that has to be reinforced, and I want it to be ingrained in our consciousness that there is an opportunity for us to be the dominant force for good in the world if we understand how to maintain that. And the more you regulate it, the less you get. That's why I say innovate before regulating completely. Soft touch is important. Now, right-sizing your regulatory regime so as to allow for more opportunities and more competition is good. That does not mean zero regulations. That's bad. But it means right-sizing the regulatory framework so that people want to be in the market and compete. When that happens, I think we win. I was talking to some smart people recently, and they were talking about how important it is for us to recognize that the more the government stands on the chair and directs traffic, the slower traffic moves, the fewer opportunities manifest, and the harder it is to do everything else. The whole notion of the invisible hand of free markets is that 330 million Americans are better making their own decisions as often as possible. And to the extent that we can continue to do that, we find ourselves in the healthiest place. Said differently, risk takers, in the end, win. You can have the smartest people on the planet, but if they are risk averse, it's really hard for them to win a global competition. Therefore, let's make sure that we are smart, driven, disciplined, capable, but when it comes to risk, lean into it, and you're going to have more losses. I've told all my friends, I have lost more than most people that I know, but I have ended up at the top most of the competitions I've been a part of because I'm willing to trust the Hail Mary will be caught by some crazy receiver running around, scrambling and hoping and praying that the ball hits his hands. That's kind of the way that I worked when I was in business. I mean, I spent 15 years running a couple of companies, and the only way to be really successful is to do your very best to be at the cutting edge. And it leads to more losses, but it is the concept of creative destruction that leads to great human prosperity. It always has, always will, and to the extent that we do that, I think we find ourselves in that place. Not happening in Europe, happening here. How do you win a competition with China? They have 1.4 billion people. We are hanging around 330, and most of us aren't having enough kids to replace ourselves. So that means our slide down from a population perspective is not heading in the right direction. So we can talk about, we can talk about immigration if we have time, or we can talk about y'all have more kids. That's a simple concept. Get married, have lots of kids. We need 3 per family, and we'll be okay. Because 1.7 is not making it. But in the end, if we're going to win this competition with 330 million versus 1.4 billion, we've got to be risk takers. 5% of the world's population lives in America, 95% do not. That means 95% of our potential consumers are somewhere else. So let's continue to grow this pie in such a way that innovation and creativity leads us into every single market around the planet, and let's teach people how to do it right.
I love what you said about innovate first, regulate second.
Yes.
You know, the EU recently had a report, the Draghi report, I'm not sure if you've heard about it, where it talked exactly about this, how Europe has too much regulation of innovation, but the solution that they've come up with is, let's figure out how to regulate more.
Exactly. Well, I'm always fascinated, which was my word for frustrated. I'm always fascinated when I hear these well-intentioned people talk about it didn't work last time, so let's not examine what it was, break it apart, examine it, put it back together. My theory is examine it, break it apart, and whatever didn't work, throw it away. And if you need to add something, let the market prove that something else is necessary. We have so much duplication in all government, even here, but multiple times worse with our European friends. That just leads to stifling of a marketplace. And whenever you stifle that marketplace, you get less from it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your, go back to your comments on national security and economic security. And I think one thing that's under your remit in banking, that's on a lot of people's minds, and you've talked a little bit about it, is export controls.
Yes.
And what should be the administration's posture on that? What is Congress going to do? Will you legislate in that area?
Yeah, we will. I think there is this may sound contradictory to everything I've said so far. There is a great race, however, in the AI space and in technology, and one of the ways that we win it is by making sure that our greatest companies, our greatest innovators, protect our most sensitive areas. In order to do that, we need to understand our competition. We need to understand our adversaries. So our competitors are very different than our adversaries. But you have an adversarial position against the United States of America, we should slow down your ability to compete and kill Americans. And so to the extent that we understand that competition is happening out there, that we find ourselves in the best position to say, no, we're not going to allow our companies to export into certain markets that are sensitive from a national security or military perspective. So that's where you're going to see, from my perspective, an emphasis from an export control conversation. I think we also should study as much as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can. And John Cornyn and a number of other senators are already working on legislation to study the impact of our investment in different parts of the world and what that looks like. I would like for us to continue to do so, but we know that there are bad actors out there, and we have already identified who those bad actors are. So I want to make sure that we slow the flow of capital and technology into the areas where people really are trying to hunt and kill Americans.
Yeah, that is very important. Well, so changing gears a little bit, there's been a lot of discussion on trade in Washington in just the 3 weeks.
Yes.
The Trump administration.
Remarkable 3 weeks.
In office, it is. I think you'll see people who focus on trade around the room tired because we've been working nonstop since it started. On day one, the America First trade policy memo came out and instructed agencies to identify foreign trade barriers and to come up with solutions. What are we going to do to address these barriers, which a lot of us find a great opportunity to really talk about a lot of the issues that you've talked about today. What is on your mind in that space? What do you expect the administration to kind of come forward with? Are there any things that you hope that the administration will do in particular in that space?
Yeah, there's an ongoing, robust conversation that I'm having with the administration about how we right-size the trade conversation as we approach trade priorities. I look forward to having our trade rep there and working hard. We had a vote, at least a hearing last week, I think it was, and a serious conversation about the importance of our objectives. You remember that South Carolina is the home of, I guess, $3 trillion or so exports. We have Boeing, which of course is the largest exporter in our country. We have Volvo, we're the home of every major tire company. BMW, the #1 BMW plant in the world is in South Carolina. And so we take this issue seriously. One of the things I hope that we see from the administration is this conversation evolving around reciprocal trade, that they want, and when I say reciprocal trade, I should say reciprocal access to markets. And that's what the president, I assume, is looking for, is making sure that we take a serious country by country, sector by sector evaluation of where are the headwinds for America or American companies to compete in this global competition, and where are the headwinds, where are the impediments for us to get into markets, and wherever those markets are more difficult for us to get into than for them to get into our market, you'll find this administration seeing that as a bad thing. And so trying to right-size the conversation of reciprocity is an important part of their engagement. I think they're going to get there quickly. They seem to be moving at record breakneck speed already on everything, not most things, but everything. And so figuring out where they're going to end, ain't got a clue, but I know the direction we're going.
Yeah. I think we all hope that we'll have that kind of opportunity through this, and thank you for that. I'll just close with a more personal question. When you're back in South Carolina and you're talking about your responsibilities on banking and finance, how do your constituents think about these issues? How do they think about international trade? In my career, there's been so much discussion about how do we explain the benefits of trade to people outside of Washington, and to make that clear. So I'd really love to hear anything you can share about that.
I think the average South Carolinian thinks very little about international trade, to be honest with you. Just to be blunt. Anybody disagree with me? Where you live, do you have robust, invigorating conversations about trade?
Well, I do, but...
Errol, that's because you're smarter than the rest of us, by the way. I know that. Amazon should be having conversations about it, but I mean, seriously. Barbara, that's
Yes.
okay. Do you sit at the kitchen table and talk to your neighbors about FDI, foreign direct investment, and the power of
I do not,
quantum
but
computing?
I've been talking about trade all my life.
See, and you still don't do it. That proves my point. But anyways.
I live alone.
Yes,
I
yes.
don't have any close neighbors.
Well, that's very good. That's very good. You are the average American. See, that's exactly right. So, but here's what they do say, however, is when they're having a conversation about the car they're going to buy, they're having conversations sometimes about Chevys or Ford F-150s. If you were my grandfather when he was still alive, his definition of a truck was a Ford, or Ford. I'm a Toyota man. And so without even us knowing it, we're having a conversation about trade.
Yeah.
Just is. When you think about the conversation we have about brands that we are familiar with, many of those brands are not American brands. We're already having a conversation about trade. The question is, how do you then formulate that conversation into a structure that allows you to understand the impediments, the benefits, and the global impact of a simple conversation about something as simple as cars? Well, you don't do that at the kitchen table, but you do recognize as a lawmaker that while we don't have a serious conversation about trade, when you go on Amazon and you order something, as I do, you find...
Thank you for that, by the way.
Yes, you're welcome. It's a powerful tool. I used to say, I'm going to the mall. Now I'm like, I'm going to Amazon. So we're going to have this brick and mortar conversation.
Yeah, we can talk about
forever,
that
right?
later.
But at the end of the day, right? At the end of the day, though, we're all having this conversation about access to what you want. And part of the conversation I have as a lawmaker is that there are certain key components that for some things that you want to buy, you can't get in America. So part of that conversation is about getting the necessary components to make something that you want to buy here, but you can't get it unless there is carve out, a cut out, or exception to something that we're trying to do from a global perspective that has an immediate impact on the availability of something. And so for South Carolinians, that is not the conversation. Unless you're a company that needs those rare materials that you can't find here. I just had this conversation with someone who produces the most fire-resistant fabric in the world, but there's a small ingredient that her company needs that comes from outside of our border.
Yeah.
And so while the firefighter doesn't know that conversation is happening, but everybody wants those firefighters coming home.
Yeah.
And we lost 9 firefighters to a major furniture store fire a few years ago, more than 10. So in odd ways, the trade conversation is always important, even if you don't hear the word trade.
Yeah.
And so my hope is that my responsibility doesn't end because I didn't hear the words I was looking for, but that I'm always alert and on the lookout for a way to improve the American experience here at home, which oftentimes requires me to embrace the global conversation about getting it here and or taking it there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Senator.
Yes, ma'am.
It was great
Absolutely.
to be with you and to hear your
Thank you.
thoughts. Thank you.
Go Broncos.
Go Cowboys!
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Scott.
Absolutely. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Very grateful for you making the time to be with us. Senator, I must say, though, I'm a Giants fan.
Oh, my goodness. We're both in trouble.
Yeah, we're both in trouble. But I will say, when you picked this room, you picked a room full of trade wonks. So I think these are the folks who are talking about trade around the dinner table. We are very grateful to all of you for sticking around. We're not going to really take a break. We're going to just getting our next speakers mic'd up, and we're going to roll right into our next conversation.